Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing good, Scott. How are you?
Except for coughing up a lung here for a second, I think I'm pretty good.
That's good.
Ah.
Sorry I missed a couple of weeks. I had a couple of classes.
Oh no, no, that you didn't miss a whole lot, to be quite honest with you. Yeah, we've sort of, I guess, struggling a little bit for content. Um, Let me click on this other, see if I can get this to pause. Um, and and finding guests to come on. So um, we actually started switched it up a little bit at our last board meeting, or one of our last board meetings. Um, our new board secretary is involved in the hemp CBD market, and she says, why don't we start talking about, what's the endocannabinoid system, what's CBD, what's what are cannabinoids. Um, so we're going to do that for a couple of weeks, kind of talk on that stuff a little bit. Last week we just basically went over the basics on what's the endocannabinoid system and what are cannabinoids, referencing basically the emerging clinical applications book that Normal has out. The first few pages in that kind of cover some of those basics. What are the receptors? What does what? Um, and we'll follow up now with getting a little more detail into some of these things. Of course, the big question in the past couple of years since it's been legalized here in South Carolina is what is CBD. So we're actually going to have Vaughn talk a little bit about that to us tonight.
Great. If you have any input or any, from the cannabis nursing side, please let me know.
Well, absolutely. Like I said, as Vaughn presents our topic tonight, um, feel free to chime in to share some of your insights. I know I saw you post. I think it was in on Jill's group that you are taking some classes in. I believe it has to do with cannabis. Correct?
Yeah, actually, I've been enrolled. I'm now enrolled in the University of Maryland, the Baltimore campus, which is their a virtual class for medical cannabis sciences and therapeutics.
That's what I saw. University of Maryland. Yeah, I saw that. Very cool. Very cool. Um,
Starts on the 23rd of August.
oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you were starting yet, or so that's the next fall semester.
Yep.
What have I got
What's going
popping up
on,
here?
everybody?
Hi, Vaughn. How are you? Vaughn, this is Michael Harvey. Michael's with American Cannabis Nurses Association. He will be one of our participants at our January event.
Nice. Hey,
Um,
how you doing, Mike?
Nice to meet you, Vaughn.
I want to kind of follow that one up real quick with I had a conversation this week with Frank Knack of the I'm sorry, of the ACLU of South Carolina. Um, I want to say yesterday, and the ACLU is interested in participating in our event on in January,
Cool.
and also available as a resource to us to maybe help make some connections along the way. And as a matter of fact, referred us to. Let me go back here a second. Uh, Americans for Prosperity. They're actually a more conservative side group, but they are pro marijuana decriminalization. And I haven't followed back up with them yet, but the response is that yes, they were interested and would love to be a part of our conference as well. Um, so we're starting to build our base a little bit, and I'm really excited about that.
Nice.
Vaughn, your volume's very very quiet.
Oh, hold on.
Can anybody else hear her? Okay, is it just me?
It's a little low.
Let's make sure I got the right. Can you hear me now? Check one, check two.
Now I can hear you better. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Um, Where are we here? Excuse me. All righty, give me a moment and we will get started in another just about a half a minute here.
So we're gonna do like well, I see we're live on YouTube, so shout out to anybody that can see us on YouTube. But um are we it's gonna be a conversation style, right? I know that obviously the title is Cannabis Conversation, so I don't want to be on the nose there.
Well, we had, and my hopes have always been that our Wednesday night calls are a conversation. Um, as much as I start to just ramble on through a whole bunch of it, I try to stop every now and again and go, "Does anybody have anything to say about this or that?" Or, uh, and I'm going to go ahead and reset my headphones real quick, folks. Bear with me.
Well, hey everybody, hey Kristen, I see you in the shadows there.
Hi, nice to see ya.
Yep, good to see y'all too.
All right. Well, we're at 7:03. I have my little script out here, so I think we should get started with our cannabis conversation tonight. I want to start by kind of welcoming everybody and just start with our disclaimer that all of our meetings are an environment of education and awareness and are not an open market for the sale, purchase, or distribution of cannabis. We do not encourage or condone illegal behavior of any kind. This is the South Carolina National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, NORMLS. South Carolina Cannabis Conversation. And we do this every night, Wednesday night. I'd like to start by just welcoming my everybody who's here on the call with me, plus anybody that may be watching on our live stream on YouTube, and also anybody that might be watching as a recording later on YouTube. Mentioning YouTube, please be aware we are not monitoring the comments in the comment section, but if you do have comments, questions, or concerns, please leave them below in the comments and we'll visit the comment section in a couple of days and try and address your comments, questions, or concerns. We were sort of rambling on before the meeting started and talking about a little bit about the direction that the cannabis conversation is going to be taking for the next couple of weeks. We are out of legislation. A legislative session at the state level ended in basically mid-June. May. No, it wasn't that long ago. But they're done for the season. They're back in their home offices. There's not going to be much of anything going on at the State House until January. And of course, that's why we've scheduled our convocation, our conference for January 15th, just days after the startup of the new session. January 11th will be the startup date. So instead of just me rambling every Wednesday night, as can happen sometimes, we've decided to start kind of building the board and I have a little list on the back of topics to kind of discuss. We'd also like to ask you if you do have any topics that you'd like us to discuss down the line, please leave them in the comments and I will go and ask Kristen to go find that form real quick and add them to the form if any suggestions come in. On that form, we do have some interesting topics. Some of them even talk about, how prohibition started and talk about who Harry Anslinger is. My favorite kind of focus point is the more of the Nixon era of it, but talking a little bit about the history of it. And I don't have the list open, so I can't mention what else was on it at the moment. There it is. I love having two monitors on my computer. Um, oh, and it's been added to. Ron's been busy. uh, and also one of the things we wanted to start talking about is what are cannabinoids? What do they do? How's this stuff work? Why is all this important? And last week we did touch on some of the real basics. What's the endocannabinoid system? Talked a little bit about cannabis receptors, the cannabinoid system receptors, and we talked about cannabinoids. What are they? And, the products in the plant. Uh, we wanted to sort of drill down or focus down a little bit tonight. And so we've asked Vaughn to come on in. Vaughn, am I pronouncing it right? Postema?
Yeah, actually, you are.
Thank you.
That does never happen.
I don't think I've ever asked you that before, and I usually like to make sure I ask before I go pronouncing people's names. Um, Vaughn's going to be talking to us tonight about one of those components, the CBD. Many of us know about THC. That's the devil's lettuce portion of it. I'll jokingly say, and CBD, excuse me, has been really popular the past few years, especially here in South Carolina, since the hemp laws and the CBD laws were passed. I want to say 2016, the year I moved here. They had just passed that year. Um, so, with that said, I'm going to introduce you to Vaughn. Vaughn is our board secretary and also our go-to for membership information. Once we get that all figured out, um, we're starting out working on some of that now. But how to join and what are the benefits and all that fun stuff. But Vaughn's going to tell us a little bit about CBD tonight. So, there goes my mouth.
Hello.
Vaughn, go ahead and say hi to everybody.
What's up, everybody? What's going on? Just as Scott said, I'm Vaughn. Vaughn Postema. You can call me VP, whichever is easier. And I'm happy to be here, being the secretary on the board. Just joined in, and it's been really exciting so far. Really cool to see all the hard work that the board's been putting in, and so I'm glad that they welcome me with open arms. So tonight rather, I figured that we chat about CBD. I'm a very talkative person, if you have not gathered that yet. So definitely I'm all about having a two-way, but there's more people on here, so just a big conversation about CBD. And absolutely feel free to jump in at any point in time, because one thing that I will say is that I never claim to be an expert, just happen to be really interested in what's going on, especially in the CBD world. So if you know some things, make sure that you chime in. And just like Scott said, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you hit us up in that comment section and so forth. So I think a good way to kind of start off is that just like when Scott said that THC, as it's been known as like the devil's lettuce, CBD, I always look at, in every single cannabinoid, like I look at them all as like their cousins, right? And they are a big family. They are living in this cannabis plant, and all those different cannabinoids do something different. And I think there's over like 480 cannabinoids, which is kind of insane when you think about it, because we talk so much about just a handful when there's just so many. So there's so much that we don't know about the cannabis plant, which is exciting, especially just kind of for future research and things of that nature. Like, think of all the magical goodness that is in the cannabis plant that we just don't know about. But tonight, as we talk about CBD, we'll talk a little bit about actually a variety of things. So make sure we don't go down a rabbit hole. But for one, I think it's kind of cool that when we talk about all those cannabinoids, kind of talking about the entourage effect, right? So CBD by itself, we're familiar with CBD, right? And especially in South Carolina, more so hemp derived CBD. And kind of understanding the difference between like a high CBD flower and a hemp derived CBD, right? So hemp itself, that's what we deal with the most in South Carolina, is chock full of CBD, right? And usually those high CBD flowers are also high in like THC contents, things like that. So that entourage effect, if you've ever heard of the entourage effect, and I'm sure everyone on this call has heard about the entourage effect. Is that safe to say? You can, since we're on Zoom, you can raise your hand if you'd like, or little nod or whatnot. The entourage effect in itself, like when we talk about going back to that high CBD flower, that's one of those advantages that people have when they're in states where they can get that, where all the cannabinoids are working together, right? And that's earlier when I said that they're like cousins, they're like a family. Well, they definitely start acting like a family when they're all in the same place, when they're all in the same system. So it's believed a lot through the research that CBD assists THC in being, instead of being the devil's lettuce, it ends up being able to be much more tolerable for people, especially helping with kind of the anxiety effects and things like that. So the entourage effect ends up having way more of health benefits, right? So, and it's kind of like, it's kind of simple in terms of remembering what it means, because entourage, if you think about you and your homies rolling up together in the club, that's your entourage. That's how it is when the cannabinoids get together. Like they get together, they work together, they have a good time, and it's the better the better bang for your buck, if you will. But when it comes to a place like in South Carolina, right? In South Carolina, you can't really experience that too much. We can with different, well, it's kind of hard because of the fact that we're a 0.3 percent THC limit with the hemp. So you can still experience that entourage effect, but not to the levels that other places can, right? So that's something to think about as well. Scott, you're unmuted. Yes.
Yeah, I would also want to sort of add to that. When you're looking for the full entourage of cannabinoids in your product, um, my suggestion is to try to go as whole plant as you possibly can.
Mhm.
And that's one of the dangers that we have here in South Carolina with the opinion letter that SLED asked the Attorney General to write, basically saying since they can't tell the difference, it's
Right.
got to be illegal. You can't have smokable hemp or hemp flower available in the dispensaries. So you have to then process it even further, which
Right.
damages trichomes, and it just loses loses efficacy the more I think you break it down.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. No, absolutely. Like you're right there where the best thing is to be able to have that full spectrum, right? So that's an excellent segue into, we talk about that entourage effect and the excellent benefits of it. But when it comes to CBD, a lot of times you're faced with either full spectrum, broad spectrum, or CBD isolate, right? And a lot of times here in South Carolina, you can find all three in terms of products that are more like topicals or sublinguals, things of that, or even ingestibles. Um, and that full spectrum is exactly what it means. It's full spectrum. Those cannabinoids, all of those things are present in that particular product. And just to what Scott was saying, you have more of that entourage effect. You experience it and its full benefits because all those cannabinoids are working together. Broad spectrum removes that THC, but still has other cannabinoids, but there still can be traces of THC in it. And we're going to get to why that's important in a little bit. And then, of course, CBD isolate is just the CBD. So it's gone through more processing and things of that nature in order to get it to a place where it is just CBD. That's the only cannabinoid. Now, it's beneficial in terms of when you're in a state where you're trying to be extra careful, like it's THC isn't allowed, and or the certain percentage, of course. And once again, we're talking about hemp derived CBD. It's beneficial in that way, and it still has benefits, health benefits, but it's not to the same effect as a full spectrum would. So when we think about where we want to be as a state and where we want to be in terms of either helping people, whether that be medically or even for people to enjoy the entourage effect and the benefits of it on a recreational level, we have to think about those kinds of things and what it may be that we are missing, and what we're not able to fully experience because of a lot of the restrictions that we have here in the state. Now, when it comes to those three different types, one thing that I did want to mention, and we wanted to make sure that this was something that was said, was that because there are traces of THC in things like your full spectrum, even your broad spectrum, that can still show up on urine tests, right? Now, we can have a very lengthy conversation about the unfairness of these urine tests, but that is a thing. You can still test hot when you're utilizing a CBD product. Like, it's very much possible. And that's another reason, not today, but eventually we'll get into COAs and reading like those certificate of analysis so that you know what it is that you are ingesting or what you're partaking in, especially if you're trying to be very careful about not showing a positive for a urine test. But that's something that we wanted to make sure that we stated, because that's something to have at top of mind if that's a worry for you. Scott?
Yes, of course, being an organization that's concerned about marijuana laws, and the laws are that, the employers are allowed to pre-employment drug test, mandated for government employers, and that just because you're taking a full spectrum CBD product does not mean you're not going to pass, that you will pass the drug test. These drug tests are not looking for the live cannabinoids in your system. They're not looking for Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. They are looking for cannabinoid let me get it right. Metabolites. I almost went the wrong direction there with isolates. Metabolites. So it's just looking for something that metabolized the cannabis. And those metabolites can metabolize different cannabinoids, multiple cannabinoids. And so you can have a full spectrum or a broad spectrum, but with the 0.3% THC, which is allowed by law in South Carolina under the hemp law that got passed, the CBD law. But it will still trigger a test. It will still prevent you from getting the job if you're applying for a job, or if you've had an accident on the job, there's the drug testing, or if you've been in trouble with the law already and now you're on a mandatory testing regime with them, compliance type thing, that will test you hot. So be very, very careful with the full spectrum and the broad spectrum CBDs. At that point, it's not as good for your. I don't want to downplay the benefits of CBD, but also as we were talking about the entourage effects, when they're working together, there's greater efficacy. I relate it a lot of times when I'm working in my garden, and it's all about the nutrients coming up from the soil. And sometimes those nutrients are in the soil, but they're locked up because another nutrient isn't in there to kind of unlock them for the soil to allow the plant to uptake them. And it works similarly with cannabinoids, that when they're working together, you've just got greater effect, greater efficacy to the whatever you're trying to treat. With that mention, I also want to say that there's thousands of different strains, and within each strain there is a little bit of a variation of all of these cannabinoids. And so that's why when you talk to a cannabis doctor or go to a dispensary, they'll talk to you about what you're looking to treat, and there have been strains that are identified to work better for some ailments than for others. And so that's one of the things that's important about the COAs, the certificates of analysis that Vaughn had mentioned earlier. And that's one of the reasons why legalization is more important. Well, it is better for the consumer than decriminalization. Yes, we want to stop locking people up for it, but we also want to have the consumer have safe, reliable access to regulated product, to know what's in their product. You will hear law enforcement officials tell stories about fentanyl treated or tainted marijuana causing deaths or things like that. And how do you prevent that? Regulate it, make it legal, regulate it. Although I don't believe their stories, sometimes it scares me because I'm not in a regulated market, and I don't want any fentanyl tainted who knows? They could be, sprinkle it or whatever they do with fentanyl on the CBD flower. So yeah, let's get a nice, safe, regulated market out there.
Yeah.
All right, that's my little rant on that one.
But that's agreed. We do need a safe, regulated market, a fair, safe, regulated market. But we can also go on a rabbit hole with that. But that is true, absolutely. And I wanted to point to something Mike was saying. And Mike, if you feel comfortable to do so, in our chat for those who can't see, especially on YouTube, Mike Harvey, who's here right now, Canada Nurse Mike. He's saying how he failed his drug test with the military using CBD full spectrum. And within the military, even cannabinoids without any THC is still a criminal offense. And that is completely true. I get service members who ask me for CBD often, but I make sure I give my spiel, because I say, hey man, like it can get pretty intense real fast. So Mike, if you wanted to kind of drop some gems about that, at all, put you on the spot, but I mean, that's good knowledge right there.
No, I think you covered it well. Thank you.
No problem at all. Yeah, I think that's something too that is a big miss when it comes to the military, and that can be a whole nother conversation as well. So we'll add that to the list, Scott, I guess, of things that we can talk about at Cannabis Conversations. But yeah, that is something for us to think about when it comes to, the different types of that CBD, like we said, full spectrum, broad spectrum, CBD isolate. And speaking to what Scott was saying about regulations, this is a reason why we're here doing what we're doing, and also just trying to educate people, because oftentimes I'm finding that in South Carolina, people are nervous to support that which they do not understand. And I'm sure that's everywhere, but I think especially when it comes to cannabis, like there's people who still don't really know what CBD is or how it interacts with your body, right? And that's something to also think about, because CBD, when we talk about those effects or what you're supposed to feel, right? It's been said to be non-psychoactive, and yet that might not be the best word. The best word might be that it's not intoxicating, right? Because there is an element that you do feel, right? When you feel that calming, and for those of you who have had either that hemp flower before, or you've ingested CBD in some kind of form, you know what I'm talking about, where you do have this, I like to call it a subtle shift, right? There's this subtle shift that it doesn't feel like you just stepped into the deep end of the pool, but it's just like you just kind of waded your way, and then it's like, I'm floating and this is great. And I talk about stepping quickly into the deep end because that happened to me when I was young. True story. And it was not good. But that is something that with CBD, you do have an effect, right? So, but it just is not what you may be expecting if you are used to traditional THC, right? It's not going to be that kind of suddenness, that kind of paranoia, that kind of anxiety. It doesn't work with the body in that way. In fact, and someone else may have more like better ways of explaining this, but even the way that THC interacts with that cannabinoid, Jesus, it's been a long day. Y'all know what I'm saying. The way it interacts with the system, THC and CBD interact with that system in two different ways, and so it's still combining to those receptors, but just doing it in a different way. So that's why when we talk about cannabinoids doing their thing, having that entourage effect, as you can tell, there's a lot of information out there that's useful to how these cannabinoids interact with our bodies. And I think that's something pretty groovy to think about, right? That there's so many elements that these things can help with, right? So far, any other questions before I kind of I was going to get into the, I wanted to touch a little bit on strains, but that's going to have to be a different cannabis conversation. I will quickly say that just like what Scott was talking about, when there are different strains that have a different cannabinoid profile, right? So like Hawaiian Haze is chock full of that CBD. That's like a almost like a OG strain of hemp, right? That was a big deal. Whereas you might have a Bubba Kush CBD that also has a little bit more cannabinoids present, may not have as much CBD, as a Hawaiian haze, but has these other cannabinoids in it that really kind of help pack a punch. And that's really fun conversations that we can get into at a different time. But those things, both of those things, those different strains can provide you with a different experience, you know? So CBD isn't just this blanket thing. And that's the reason why it's important to kind of fight for the entire plant, as I say, because we're missing out if we're just experiencing one part. But before I get into the ways that you can ingest CBD, any other questions or comments out there that you got from the crew? All hearts and minds clear, because then we'll move forward.
I'm going to real quick mention, sorry, I was reading something on direct message. And I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, we were sort of talking earlier about cannabinoids and like, you know, the THC is the part that gets you high. And that I wanted to sort of backtrack on that just a little bit, because I often hear the hemp vendors when I'm like out at places talking about the body highs that you get from their product. It's like, dude, it gives you a great body buzz kind of thing. I've heard them say at concerts and things like that. Can you touch on that kind of thing a little bit? Does it give any, you know, what I would more reflect on is relaxation. It makes me feel relaxed.
Yeah.
Not like taking muscle relaxers and I'm a rubber man.
Definitely not. Or like taking another thing that people have kind of tried to compare it to is like NyQuil, or like they think it's gonna like knock you out. It's like this isn't the same. This isn't the same thing. CBD treats the system, not the symptoms. Okay, so that's not how it goes. You know what a lot of medication does.
Well,
But
and I guess well, go ahead. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
no, you're fine. I was going to speak to the body high, which, you know, I definitely have heard that a lot, and I'm sure I've said it before, because it is I think that it is a nice way to kind of describe it. But see, I'm also a type of person where, you know, and this is a personal preference, but I'm also a type of person where I think it's very important to listen to your body, right? It's very important to listen to your body, to know your body, get to know the things that your body likes and dislikes, which is something we should do with any medication, right? Like if you look at Benadryl, if you look at Advil, it's going to tell you all the things that could happen if you take it, right? But we just so willingly trust it and we go with it and things of that nature. Whereas we should spend a lot of time, you know, with our body and knowing what aches, what doesn't, what feels good, and all these other kinds of things. I say that because then when you're interacting with something like the plant, like CBD or like cannabis, that's how you're going to be able to gauge. You know, we have to be realistic about the fact that we're in this time where we're still trying to crawl our ways out of prohibition. So there's so many things that aren't, as we talked about, not having that regulated market, and then there's still so much research that's going on, and yet this plant has been around forever, right? So there's been a lot of people who have for a long time depended upon listening to their body in order to understand the effects of CBD or cannabis in general. So when it comes to CBD, it is a good way to tell people that it has that body high, because I've always likened THC high to like pulling my mind up out of my body, you know. And so for CBD, it's much more of I'm here, I'm settled, I'm grounded. That relaxation that Scott was talking about, especially when people are using ingestibles, like, you know, different edibles and things of that nature. And because of how long it takes for it to really kick in, people utilize it in that way so that by the time they're ready to lay down, the CBD starts doing its thing. It treats that system. It's aiming for homeostasis, right? So when it's doing that, that's what brings you into that space of that feeling of that body high, because it's working on the systems of the body, you know. And that's how I would, it seems like a long way to explain it, but that's how I would explain that body high.
Well, I'll share real quick if you don't mind.
Nope.
my experience when I started with full spectrum CBD product was I think I was starting with about I forget 50 or 100 milligram a day, and it was if I call it broad spectrum because there was like minimal THC, but so I'm sure they either extracted it or it was grown at that rate. I'm not sure, but I wasn't taking CBD because I needed to or wanted to treat anything specific. Um, uh, Sort of as an example, I know a lot of people will start on a CBD regime because maybe they'll have headaches or migraines or something like that. Or we all know that the CBD has been helpful with some folks with the seizure disorder, that kind of stuff. But I wasn't treating anything, so I was just sort of taking it as a daily maintenance kind of product, and waited to kind of see if anything happened, what happened, that kind of thing. So while I'm taking my 50 or 100 milligram serving each morning. It wasn't like I was getting any kind of effect from it at all that was noticeable. Um, and I like Michael's question there. Um, to me, it's an herb. It's a plant with medicinal value, medicinal purposes. So I wouldn't call it a drug, but I would call it a medicine. Um,
That's a good question, Mike. That's a good
and it
topic.
was. Let me sort of go back there. So anyway, it was probably about 2 weeks later that I kind of noticed, while evaluating this, that I was just feeling more focused, more even tempered. Uh, somebody else was asking me about it one time, and I'm like, yeah, I just felt I wasn't getting pissed off as easily, and this and that. And my wife happened to be like in the next room over, could hear the conversation, and the person I was telling said, I think a little bit for my wife's benefit, but was like, oh, so you're less of an asshole, and I'm like, yeah, accurate. I can't deny. I was definitely less irritable, less bitchy, and definitely felt calmer, felt more focused. As I told a lot of people, I would have a checklist, in my mind or whatever, of things I might want to do one day, in a day. And at the end of the day, I still had pretty much most of the checklist there because I tend to jump from project to project to project and don't get things done as much as maybe advance them all a little bit or waste a lot of time switching projects. And I found after I was on a steady CBD regime for a few weeks that I was actually finding I was getting check marks on my tick list a lot more. Although, like I say, it was a mental tick list. I was finishing projects. I was accomplishing things. I was staying more focused. So that was my experience when I first started CBD on as a regular daily supplement. Um, so I just wanted to kind of share that and put that out there that, I didn't notice any high effects, but now you're talking to somebody who also experiences marijuana. And
Yep.
I prefer the term jazz cabbage over over devil's lettuce. Jazz cabbage is currently my favorite term for it. So, okay, I'll go on.
Kind of like a cabbage playing a saxophone or something. We need we need to draft that up. That needs to be the mascot. So no, that's a great story, Scott, and I think that's a really good element too, because that focus, that anxiety, there are people who utilize CBD for that reason, which that was one of my biggest reasons for utilizing CBD when I started, was just the anxiety portion, being that focus, having that focus there, and once again the subtle shift. Like that's what I need. I'm a subtle shift person. That's what I need that to happen. I'm also finding that just in conversations that people who are more familiar with THC, uh, they would benefit more from, once again, like a high CBD flower, where that ratio is going to be greater, is going to involve that levels of THC, once again, that entourage effect. But that's what I kind of find. I'm also finding that people who may be utilizing CBD products, who have been through things like cancer treatments or things like that, and by their own will, they want to utilize cannabis products or even CBD, I'm noticing that from the people I've talked to, they need like higher dosages of CBD, especially in a place like South Carolina, where you're not really able to get that, true blue full spectrum. They're having to have the higher dose of CBD, which isn't a problem because, you can have those dosages based off of what you feel like is best for your body, which is another thing that I was going to transition into, because often when people say, well, I don't feel anything, often it is because of not knowing the dosage to take. If you have some tincture or you have a CBD oil and you take that one little drop under your tongue, you're probably not going to experience too much because you've probably taken only like 5 milligrams of CBD. So it's not going to have that same kind of effect. So definitely we get into dosage in just a second.
Right. And also, I think, as I was mentioning with mine, it tends to become a cumulative effect. It's something you want to take every day. You may not
Exactly.
notice it right away, but as time moves forward. And the other thing I wanted to kind of mention while butting in here was that, as far as I know, there's no lethal overdose, so you can't take too much CBD.
Right.
I don't think I don't know of any harmful side effect from you know taking a larger quantity of CBD. So the recommendation is always start low and go slow.
Right.
Don't, but you know, and Michael mentions here CBD has been shown
Yeah.
safe up to 1,500 milligrams a day in studies, and 1,500 milligrams is a pretty good darn serving of. Um, I I liked a product out there was sort of a paste product that came in this big syringe kind of thing, and the whole syringe I think was 1,500 milligrams, and that was like a 30 days, 30-day supply or something at 50 milligrams a day. So
That's
yeah,
that's good stuff. Mike is dropping those gems for y'all. I feel bad if you're not in the Zoom, but we'll definitely keep on reading out this good stuff.
yeah, we'll share the info that's going in the chat because these I don't think go out to the Zoom on YouTube and such. So
But that's a good, once again, kind of segue into dosage. I'll talk about dosage and then I'll talk about the ways that you can take CBD and then I'll kind of wrap it up. But dosage, when it, like, just like I said before, when it comes to that dosage, just one thing that I want to say to anybody who's thinking to try CBD, or even if you're already doing it and you're like, I need to figure out how to do these, how to get more of an effect. Really think about your dosage. Think about, a lot of times products, especially edibles, will have 25 milligrams per like gummy or something of that nature. That's usually what you see a lot of, right? So you want to think about that, and just like Scott said, you start low and slow. You start by taking one. Wait a while, because especially with something like an ingestible like that, it's going to take a little minute, maybe a couple of hours sometimes for edibles, because it's going to go through that digestive system. But venture yourself up to take two. If you feel like you're good to go, take two. I've had someone say they started off having gummies and they started with two, then they experimented with three. And they said, wow, three gummies, I had a real deep sleep, maybe too deep of a sleep. So I'm gonna scale it back to two. And it's like, there you go. That's how you're supposed to, figure out what you want to do, or rather they started with two, then went up to three, and then went back down to two. And it's just one of those things of like having accountability over your body is another element. And I'm not trying to get all deep on y'all, but that's another element here when it comes to cannabis in general, and especially the market, the kind of market that we're in. We have to have accountability over our body and be responsible. For a long time now, we have been, just kind of fed what to believe in terms of our medications. Like that's just what it is. And a lot of that has happened through marketing and advertisement, so marketing and advertisement will have you deciding how you're going to take a dosage of these other medications instead of you reading the box. So that's something for us to think about when it comes to that accountability, Scott.
you're sort of referencing like the state of our healthcare system today, and all I can say is 30 years of opioid pain management. It hasn't been working.
Yes. Right. Exactly. No,
my
exactly.
my father was a doctor. Now, mind you, he passed away when I was 12 years old, so I was pretty young as I got to know him. But he was the small town doctor that still went out on house calls. He would say, "Hey kids, I have to go on a house call to such and such the Lichtenwalder farm down here the road here." And he'd let the kid had let his kids jump in the back of the car, and we'd drive out to the farm or wherever we were going. And he'd go into the house and he'd work on whoever he was there to visit, whoever the patient was, and we go out in barnyard and play with the farm, play with the kids, and go down to the creek and catch crawfish, and all of a sudden Dad's done with whatever he was doing, and it was a different time back then. Another example, my mother always tells this story, or used to always tell this story, that frustrated the heck out of her, because there was one time one of the farmers came and there's a basket of fresh produce and a nice dressed chicken on top, and he says, "Doc, I'm here to put something on my bill." And he plopped this basket of stuff with the chicken on
I
the
wish
table.
somebody would drop food off to my house.
And my dad, I think that at that time it may have been early on when the office was still in our home, because the office was in our home originally before I was born. I think he gave it to my mom, and she looked at him like and said, "What am I supposed to do with how am I supposed to put this in the books?" And he just looked at her and went, "Put it down as paid." So yeah, he accepted a basket of produce and a chicken, for his services. I mean, I look at healthcare today and I'm going, I'd rather go to that guy. I really kind of miss that guy.
So
So
good. Now I'm hungry, Scott. So thanks for that.
you're welcome.
Thanks for that. Now I want like a Thanksgiving feast right now. But no, that's once again another great point just about healthcare in general. And I think that's another reason why when I think that people liken CBD cannabis in general to a holistic approach, if you will. And that's all well and good, but I just look at it as, once again, accountability over the body. If you're interacting with a product, people do have requirements that if you are going to use a CBD product, they also say to consult your doctor, because sometimes that's something that people also want to do, because if they're taking other medications and things of that nature. So you do want to be aware of that, because once again, this is your choice about what you want to do with your body. But once again, that dosage, just want to make sure that we put that out there, that it's important for you to, if you're doing, if there's a bottle that says, and this is a great example, because Mike just put in here that 1500 milligrams a day has been shown to be safe. If you get a bottle, once again, let's say it's a tincture and it says 1500 milligrams, that's the whole bottle. That's not one dropper, or one drop. The whole bottle is 1500 milligrams of CBD. So that means over the course of time that you take that CBD, by the time you get to the end of the bottle, you will have collectively taken 1500 milligrams. So that means that on like an average, you might be taking about, depending on that dropper, and my math and don't be mathing sometimes. So don't quote me on this.
My recommendation is at a maintenance level for somebody like myself who's not treating anything.
Yeah.
Work your way. I work my way up to 50 milligrams a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some people are into 35 milligram a day. Me, I'm a 50 milligram. That 1500 milligram bottle is going to last you 30 days. So one bottle a month kind of thing. And that'd be my suggestion. If you're treating an ailment, then you may want to consider increasing dosage from there. If you've got something specific that you're treating.
Yeah, that's good stuff. That's good stuff right there. Um, I think the last thing I'm going to talk about is the ways that you can take CBD. Right, I'm just going to kind of try to breeze through that in a way. Um, Mike has another comment in here that feels very scientific. I feel smart just reading it. I don't know exactly what it means, but I feel smarter by reading it. And it says 60% of the medications are cleared through the CYP, 450 hepatic enzyme system, and 30% specifically through the CYP 450 3A4. Drug interactions are very likely. Mike, I'm gonna have to have you explain that. So
So
I don't
in
have to
short, your liver is, metabolizes many of the drugs. There's also other routes, but so 60% of the drugs that we take from, over the pharmacy or over the counter go through a specific pathway within the liver. And even more so when you get down to smaller pathways, the 3A4, 30% of the medications you take are cleared through there. So you really have to be, your pharmacist and doctor and the patient need to be aware of what drugs you're taking so that you're not putting two drugs that are fighting for the same metabolism pathway. And that's one of our major problems because we don't know our drugs. We're not telling our pharmacist that, yeah, I take cannabis. So how's that going to affect me?
Awesome. No, that's great. I'm glad I know that because now I have another way to explain that to people. That was really great information, y'all. So I hope that you absorb that one. Because that's some dope stuff. I gotta do some more research on that. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap it up, like I said, with talking about the different ways that you can take CBD. And first, I'm going to go with inhalation, right? So inhalation is considered to be kind of the best way to take CBD in the say it's fast acting because of the way that it's absorbed, through the lungs into the bloodstream. Once again, that's going to be more of like your flower. Of course, there's vapes, things of that nature. So inhalation, that's when you're going to have the effects of CBD. You would feel a little bit more. I hesitate to say immediately, but immediately, almost like just very fast acting. I know that for me, inhalation is usually that's the ticket if it's something that I'm trying to have those effects more immediate. Another way that you can have that experience with CBD is through ingestibles. So we're talking about edibles, things of that nature. A lot of gummies. You see a lot of gummies. Some people have cookies. This is something that goes through your digestive system. So this is something to think about when you're talking about when you want to feel those effects, right? If you just think about your regular, digestive system, and when it comes to digesting food, that's a process. It takes a little time. So oftentimes people don't feel the effects of CBD until a couple of hours later. It's also a way that even though you're still intaking the CBD, it kind of, I don't want to say degrades because degrades just sounds so terrible, but it's kind of like the weakened state of CBD because of all the processes it has to go through. Another thing I like to point out about edibles is that, remember, when you eat an edible, you're also eating everything else that made that edible, right? So that's another element too. You're not just taking CBD. If you're taking a gummy, everything else that makes the gummy, you're eating that as well, which isn't a problem if it's not a problem for you. But it's just something to think about, that there's other elements there, that are interacting with the CBD. And I am still doing research on this, but I feel like I have a theory that CBD or cannabinoids in general react differently with like chocolate or different sugar levels and things like that. But once again, I'm not an expert on that. But if you do happen to know something about that, let me know, because I've got hypotheses for days. Okay, I got those. So that's another way you could do it, is with your ingestibles. Next would be sublingual. So that's going to be under the tongue, holding under the tongue, right? And it also kind of has a two-part effect, because when you hold that CBD oil tincture underneath the tongue, that's when it's absorbing into the bloodstream. Then you also end up swallowing the rest, right? So now it's still a digestive process as well. So there are often times that people kind of report these feelings of having that more immediate effect with the sublingual, but then also having like another kind of like a round two later on, because it's still going through the digestive system. So that's a little fun fact as well. Scott, I see you're unmuted. Did you have something to add?
Well, I wanted to add a little bit on there as you were talking about the inhalation and or smoking as all,
Yeah.
well, smoking and or vaping, because of course there's different ways of inhaling.
Right.
I think we may have mentioned earlier, and I was looking real quick on Normal's blog. I don't see it here, but I know they have some information where um, polls have shown that vets prefer smoking over edibles because it has that more immediate effect. So if they're having a post-traumatic stress uh, situation, they want to have immediate relief. They're not
Great
looking
point.
to eat something and
Great.
have it take 30 minutes to an hour or whatever to take effect. Um, so that's where smoking and the flower should be in our medical bills at
That's
the state
great.
level. It is in the House bill. Um, Representative Herb Kurzman, I believe he knows a family member, his brother, if I'm correct, uh, who found relief through smoking. Um, but uh, and admittedly, Senator Tom Davis admits that he took the smoking and the flower out of Senate Bill 150, the one that happens to be moving forward, at the request of SLED and law enforcement, not for the benefit of patients, but because SLED can't tell the difference. Uh, sorry, I'm rambling.
Oh boy.
So I wanted to mention that. The second thing I wanted to sort of mention is when you are absorbing directly into the bloodstream, whether it's through sublingual or through inhalation through the lungs, um, you're getting the cannabinoids pretty much as they are intact. Where once it hits the liver can convert things. Am I accurate on that? I mean, the liver can change the uh, the
True that.
cannabinoids and change the effects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that also speaks to that kind of degraded feel that sometimes is described because it's not in its, purest form, because it's gone through the body. Um, Roll over in the morning, smoke or vape, take it edible to ensure a longer coverage period. Ooh, great point. Because now my main man Mike is talking about bringing these things together, kind of collaborating, kind of your kind of a la carte, if you will, when it comes to your CBD. That's another great point. Is that if whether you might do inhalation at this part of the day and then you might take an edible later on, it's a really, you can mix and match. That's another thing as well. Sometimes there are people that there are people that I have met where that is a thing that they do. They want to smoke, and then after they smoke they might do an ingest or a sublingual treatment, and that's how they're getting ready for their day. And another thing I wanted to talk about with inhalation is, another element too that I think people should think about is how you're inhaling. So say you're a person who uses blunts, right? That's still like tobacco, So you want to think about that when you're interacting with your cannabis, because there's been studies there too in terms of the collaboration between tobacco and cannabis. To each his own, but at the same token, I think that if you really want to get that CBD effect, that's not the entourage effect that you might want to go for. You maybe go for a different, more cannabinoid focus, because we know the kinds of effects that tobacco can have. But once again, that's each his own, but that's just something to think about, because often people forget that utilizing that kind of that blunt or
Blending.
cigar, yeah, that's something that is, it's having an effect as well, so that's something that's happening as well. Once that fire gets to it, I mean, everybody's having a party then, in your joint or blunt. So uh
I've never understood mixing tobacco and cannabis. It just never clicked with me.
yeah.
Some people don't understand pineapple on pizza, which personally I kind of like, but I've never understood tobacco in my cannabis.
Yeah, it's definitely a preference thing. I know plenty of people who do it, but it's something that I think that personally, I just think that I think it's a better experience when you're just able to experience the plant itself and see what it's got going on. Um, And then the last one that I was going to say was topical, right? So a topical, like with CBD creams, things of that nature. Now, this isn't necessarily getting to your bloodstream, but it's interacting more with skin cells, all of that kind of just more dermal aspect, right? And that is something that a lot of people have been able to find a lot of relief for, depending on what it is, depending on what the depending on like the dosage and things of that nature, because topicals as well, you can have the full spectrum, broad spectrum CBD isolate. So that's a whole nother element as well sometimes when it comes to kind of your skin care treatment. But that is another way that you can utilize CBD. Any other questions about that?
I think the last thing I want to sort of mention, because we were talking about different ways of consuming, we were talking a little bit about different strains, we were talking a little bit about whole plant versus extracts. The one thing that is not in the current CBD bill in South Carolina, although it's supposed to allow flower, it only allows processed flower, so it has to be dried and cured. And it's interesting because one of the things I'm doing right now to try and work on my own health is move to a more plant-based diet. And with that comes trying to include a variety of plants to really increase the gut biome and that kind of thing. And I could actually see having raw cannabis and utilizing that in salads or juicing or, and when you're talking raw cannabis now, that THC and CBD has not been decarboxylated. Whole nother conversation on decarboxylation, but THC that is not decarboxylated is not going to get you high. You can eat the plant directly out of the field. That's not going to get you high. Um, it's in that curing and that drying process, the burning process. It's a matter of time and heat is what creates the decarboxylation. It breaks that THCA molecule. It breaks away that A acidic bond, portion of it to then become the psychoactive plant. So you can juice raw cannabis and should be able to. And that's just sort of another thing that with the current CBD laws, that sort of irks me. We should be able to grow it at home, grow it in our gardens, juice it, add it to our salads, get it back into our diets.
Yeah.
Which kind of relates back to a question that Michael brought up earlier. Is it a drug? Is it a medicine? Is it a plant? I think it should be part of our diet. I consider it, a plant, a healthy plant.
Yeah, that's a good roundtable discussion right there. So we're definitely gonna put that on the list. That's good, and I'm glad you mentioned about the THCAs, and there's even CBDA, and all. We definitely, especially when we talk about the certificate of analysis, you'll see all of that in there too, and that's another element too when you're trying to figure out what strain is best for me or what product is best for me, what it all is involved. But that's
Right.
that's just a little cliffhanger, a teaser for for what's to come.
For coming week, yes.
I'm gonna flip it back to Scott.
I see we've clicked over to 8 o'clock here. I want to thank you all for joining us for the hour. Not only do you get me to ramble at you, now we have one that likes to talk a bit too. And I've enjoyed this because it's much more of a conversation tonight than we've had sometimes. We will be back talking a little bit more about other aspects of the cannabinoids in the next couple of weeks. As we briefly mentioned, decarboxylation. What the heck is that? THCA, CBDA, huh? We'll be kind of covering those sort of topics as we move forward over the next few weeks. But with that, I do want to sort of wrap us up as we're now clicking out of time. Thank you for joining us. If you do have any comments or questions for us, reach us at our email, which is normalsouthcarolina@gmail.com. Find us on our website at normalsc.org or also scnormal.org, new domain name. And if you like to keep up with what we're doing, we spend a lot more time on Facebook, but also Instagram and Twitter we post to. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube page. I'm looking forward to seeing you all right back here again next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Thanks for being here.